Everybody wants to be a part of the culture.
Until it's time to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
So we're having the uncomfortable conversations needed to spark the change.
Right here, right now.
We're your hosts, Kai Devereaux Lawson.
And I'm Simeon Coker.
And we say all the things you wouldn't.
Welcome back to the Mixed Company Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Usually when you see me, I'm here introducing another episode of Mixed Company Podcast. However, we've got something really exciting for you as we are zooming into 2024. It's a new year, and that means new exciting opportunities and partnerships. And with that, we are partnering with the Advertising Club of New York as the Advertising Club of New York presents Mixed Company for 2024. This collaboration aims to bring together the best of both worlds, and that's the expertise of the Advertising Club and the engaging content of the Mixed Company Podcast. So, as part of this partnership, both organizations, we're going to work closely to create valuable content and relevant content for our audiences. Each episode is going to consist of industry experts and thought leaders invited to share their insights and experiences on various topics related to what? All things advertising. And so as we kick off our first episode, I want to do not just the right thing, but the thing we love to do, which is to give a shout out to the folks we love the most and welcome the team from the Advertising Club of New York on, just to say a quick hello so you know that it's real and we're not just talking. Alicia, Gina, Enas, you're here. I think I saw Chris on. Thank you guys for joining us this year.
Oh my gosh, this is such an exciting thing. We have been long fans of Mixed Company. We've done so many cool things together, and adding this to our repertoire is just super exciting. The club has great content together. I think this is going to be one of the best podcasts ever.
Love it.
Cannot wait. And you know we love a club. So this will definitely be a good time for all of us. We've got 12 months of great content. So Gina, Alicia, Enas, Chris, team, all the team that can be here and can't be here, thank you. And you guys stay tuned for more episodes. But before you get more episodes, you're going to get this episode. And so today, we're going to focus on our 2024 Trends Report. Like we said, we've got the Advertising Club here, and you've got Mixed Company here, and we're talking about advertising. And it's January when we're recording this. And that means everybody's trying to predict what we're going to see in the future. And so as we're predicting, making those predictions and talking about what we're seeing, I want to bring in some of our amazing guests, or two of our amazing guests, our first guests, which make you guys our best guests, because who's ever trying to be in a number 2 spot? Not me. I want to present to you guys Rick Song, President, Brand Innovators Strategy Group, Board Chair Emeritus of the Ad Club of New York, Board Advisor and Investor, Nonprofit Volunteer and DEI Advocate, LMNOP, QRS, Y, and Z, and all of the titles. Rick, welcome to the Advertising Club of New York presents Mixed Company Podcast. How are you?
Thank you so much, Kai. Wow, that was a full-blown introduction, which I appreciate, but I'm excited to be here and get into the conversation.
Absolutely.
We like a good resume. It's the real deal.
Love a good resume. That's what this business does best, right? Yeah. And in addition to Rick, we have our good friend, longtime listener, longtime friend, huge supporter, also a member of the Advertising Club of New York. We've got Enas Hassan here, who is the program manager of the International Andy Awards, which in itself is super exciting because Enas, you are literally program managing all things history. I'll never forget how excited everyone was when, you know, the Andes got that major shout out on Mad Men, because it's been long. And now you are the program manager, so welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
Pleasure.
Actually, you get to see all the trends as they're coming in every year.
Yeah, I get to watch YouTube videos all day. It's the best part of my job.
Listen, isn't that the job that the kids are going for these days? I know a 14-year-old right now that if he could get paid to watch YouTube all day, he'd be paying the mortgage pretty much. So, All right, so we're going to jump right into it, right? So we're talking about all things advertising, but we can't talk about advertising unless we're talking about money. And we can't talk about money unless we're talking about this economy that we're living in. Folks are worried about interest rates. We're seeing budgets being cut left and right. And so, Rick, I'll actually start with you because you've got the resume, you've seen the things, you've seen how the business has changed over the course of many years, and the highs, the lows, the ups and the downs. And I'd love to get your sense of how you perceive the current economic climate and how it's influencing the advertising landscape.
Thanks, Kai. Yeah, it's a great question. And, at Brand Innovators, we engage with marketers with our consulting group that I run every day. And we also see CMOs and brand executives on stage in our programming, every week of the month. So we get to hear firsthand kind of what's happening out there. And what's interesting, the interesting dynamic is I think that there was a big anticipation for a recession, right? But the reality is economic indicators for the country are actually pretty strong. Solid GDP growth, inflation is starting to decrease. Unemployment is at an all-time low. So their economic indicators are kind of going one direction, but there's no question the ad economy is softened. And I don't know if that's an indicator of just maybe the anticipation of the recession, the long-awaited recession that hasn't happened yet, which I guess some pundits are still anticipating. But we definitely are hearing marketers talk about the cutting of their budgets. They're having to be smarter, of having to perhaps table some of innovation investments, right? Perhaps maybe some of the things in Web3 as an example, versus the tried and true, performance-driven marketing efforts that drive their businesses. So it's an interesting dichotomy. I think 2024 will be interesting as well because I think pretty much for the last year and a half we've anticipating some kind of massive overall slowdown in the country, some kind of recession to occur, and it really hasn't happened yet. Although we have seen the ad economy softening a little bit. And so it'll be interesting to see how 2024 nets out, as a result.
How do you think the sort of ping pong of the economy or the perception of the economy is going to affect messaging this year when it comes to consumers? Do you think that because there is all of this economic uncertainty, whether the big wigs are saying it's not or it is, do you think that's going to have an impact on how brands message to consumers this year?
I mean, I think so. I think you're still going to hear value-driven messaging. I think that's going to continue to be a staple. I think by definition you're going to see some of the major brands pulling back on the scale of advertising they're doing. So in a sense, that's kind of a messaging in itself, right? That there will be less messages, probably from a high level, macro level perspective. But I think it's still a lot of TBD. There's a lot of things happening this year that will affect the ad economy from a technology perspective, whether it's the impact of Gen AI, which we hear it's impacting many different levels of marketing and advertising investment, but also productivity and output. Obviously the deprecation of cookies, which is really finally kicked off in January of this year, just a few weeks ago. I think 1% of Chrome users were not served third-party cookies anymore, and that trend is going to continue to happen throughout this year moving forward. So we're finally going to have a cookie apocalypse. Am I saying that right, Kai? I don't know.
Apocalypse. That sounded right to me.
Apocalypse. But yeah, I'm not hip to the term. But that is going to have certainly an impact on the ecosystem, right? In terms of the shift that's finally going to take place, and brands having to deal with identity resolution and all the different technologies and platforms that are being built that don't use cookies over the last several years that are really going to start to take momentum. So there's a lot of different indicators, a lot of different kind of things that will impact kind of output and messaging for this year, but it's not going to be solely economic environment alone.
Absolutely. So Enas, I'm actually going to toss the next question over to you because Rick is 100% right. I think that there is a different approach to how we are foraging forward with the marketing landscape. Cookies are now becoming the new four-letter word. We're seeing that there are new platforms that are kind of coming in place of, how we've been marketing, let's say, over the last 5 to 7 years. That also means that creativity and how creativity is shifting is changing right before our eyes. And as you are sitting at the heart and the center and the eye of the storm, if you will, of award season, where the Andes is at the upfront of the season and usually ends up to, whoever wins at the Andes, you tend to see them win throughout the year. And so you are all over YouTube, you are watching all kinds of case studies, you are engaging with all of the most elite creatives. I'd love to get your sense, Enas, how you feel about what new and innovative creativity formats or approaches or things or perspectives even that you foresee gaining prominence in advertising in 2024. I think last year was really interesting where there was this upswing in utilizing celebrities for a lot of commercial spots. We also saw a lot more humor in spots as coming out of the or not completely, but moving away from COVID speech and fear-based speech and trying to protect ourselves. And so what does 2024 look like as most people are back in the streets? Most people are living their lives as best as they can, given given the economic positioning. So what are you seeing for creativity in 2024?
Yeah, well, first, like piggybacking on, what Rick was saying, I think like the recession part is a little like, it's like, are we in a recession? Do we have to like, cut budgets? So I think there is a part of the industry that is, maybe considering if they're going to prioritize the go big or go home type of advertising where they're going to be more risky. But also on the other hand, we're seeing like the type of Super Bowl ads like RGA and Mischief, the Reddit and the Tubi ads that are just like using their material, using their limelight in whatever like the most subversive way possible in order to get that attention. And so there's like both ends. And I think like even in the pandemic, we saw that there was like agencies and brands maybe cutting or like reevaluating what they're entering. And I think like one really cool thing we did at the Andes, especially for the markets that are in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, that are making really great work, where it's like sometimes they're making really great work, but in the award show spaces they might have to maybe make the work but not enter it for the recognition. So we created this really cool opportunity called for we call it the regional competition, where agencies in Africa, Asia, well, APAC, in the Suwana region, which is Southwest Asia, North Africa, in Latin America, they can enter it for free. So I think that like that helps us kind of gauge what and ensure what great work is out there, and also make sure that it,
barrier, like,
yeah,
because it is a huge barrier. And I think when we're talking about creativity, it goes even beyond just repurposing. Like, I think last year we saw a lot of nostalgia based creativity, a lot of pulling things back from the 90s. We're reliving Clueless, we're reliving our favorite TV shows, we're bringing back Friends. Even the Emmys, I think the presentation this year with the Emmys, it was a lot of trying to repurpose that way. But I love the approach that you're talking about, which is how do we remove barriers so more people get to play in the space of creativity globally? And I'd love to hear that.
yeah.
One of the things, go ahead.
Because I think like when it comes to like mediums, materials, I think there's so many ways that creatives can play. And sometimes one campaign will take on different formats. So I think like talking about like what new VR, AI thing that they can use, I think just like creativity overall is just taking on so many faces, from like old school print, and like just really being as creative as possible, as subversive as possible. So I think it's not limited to any like innovative material. I think there's so many innovative things happening in the world that we can't keep up with, but yeah.
Sure.
I would add though onto your question, Kai, on formats though, I think in the pandemic, obviously we were all connected more to our screens, and really the popularity and surge of TikTok, kind of came out of the pandemic, and it also retrained the general population, the global population, I should say, in terms of how we consume video content, and it's really redefined what short form video is. And so I think we're going to see continued evolution of what that means in terms of advertising. And we've already seen that happening over the last couple of years coming out of the pandemic, as Reels and other, from Facebook and other kind of similar formats to the TikTok experience have emerged. We're going to see more of those experiences, I think, evolve as a standardized format, which is going to push kind of the creators and creativity into the short form video format to be even more unique, to have messaging stand out.
And I think what's actually excited about that, not to stay here too long, but one of the things that I think is really going to be a trend, and a good trend as far as I'm concerned. So I think I gave a lot of constructive criticism last year about creativity, is that our timing, our cultural timing, I think is actually going to be better as we are moving into this space where there's more intersectionality between that user generated content, what's happening in culture, and how agencies are brands are actually able to reuse that. And so one of the ways that I've seen that come to life over the last couple of days is the Uber Eats commercial with David Beckham and Victoria. And that was just a few months ago when they dropped their Netflix special, and they had that tell the truth moment that's now become this big pop cultural phenomenon that I think might have actually taken a year or so ago for brands to pick up on. Those were huge memes. Like, I don't know culturally what community wasn't using the tell the truth meme when he's saying like, you weren't working class, like your dad drove a Rolls Royce, and that's not a working class vehicle. That's no Toyota Camry that we're talking about here. And so for me, the fact that I laughed almost immediately and got it and didn't feel that it was outside of the realm of something relevant, and it didn't feel cheesy, but it was just cheeky enough that it was like, oh, okay, whoever was working on this was paying attention. I do feel like timing is actually going to be a lot better without just relying on, the celebrity, selling celebrities, selling sex, selling all of the old tropes that we've had to really dig into, nostalgia even, that we've had to dig into in the last few years.
I was just about to hit on that too, because we saw what happened with Snoop a couple of weeks ago with the Up Smoke, right? So they're relying on the big celebrity name isn't good enough anymore. We're actually forcing the consumer, or the reaction of or culture is forcing us to be a lot more strategic with how we're using them. Like, there has to be something that actually resonates with the people in order for that spin to make sense.
Yeah, I think I saw that with like, there's the Coca-Cola. I don't know if you guys watched The Bear, where the I think it was both the NFL created like a bear-esque kind of they like adapted a form of the bear, and also Coca-Cola readapted that dinner scene from the second season to kind of like build on the double hype of what's happening. So like aligning, brands are like being successful when they align themselves with like hype moments or like cultural moments, and then it's a kind of like an inside joke type thing.
For sure. Another big conversation that's really taking over, and I'd be interested to see if this sustains in the way that people are talking about it, or if it kind of falls flat in the way that I think virtual reality may have over the last decade, where AI is the center of conversation across the board, right? And that goes into everything from how work is getting done, how people are approaching doing their resumes, how people are approaching selecting their talent. I don't know if AI is being used at all in the Andes, Enas, but we even know that how we are going about selecting, and predicting what the best content is actually being handled through AI. And so in terms of emerging technologies, I'd love to get a sense for how you guys think that AI, augmented reality, virtual reality, how these things may impact advertising in 2024.
Yeah, well, I think Gen AI is already being, integrated into the processes for creativity in advertising already, and I think certain tasks, certainly productivity, to your point, Kai, but things like data analysis, content creation, scaling campaigns, it's kind of already being utilized, but I don't think it'll replace creativity or the need for human creativity or the human lens, right, into the world to make great work. Um, I think it's going to be continue to be more accelerated. It's going to happen faster than any generation of technology we've ever experienced. But I don't think it's going to replace the need for a human, the human eye, human lens into the world to make great, creative work. But it'll definitely scale the level of the ability to create work and to be more productive and work faster, cheaper, better, and all those things. I think we're already seeing signs of that. It's definitely a topic we hear our marketers talk about, all the time. And then as far as AR and VR, I mean, there's versions of it from there's small versions of it from a snap filter, right, to great creative examples to digital out of home, whether it's Times Square or in Tokyo or in London, some of those grand activations that are AR or VR generated are fantastic. So I think there's great examples of it already being done, and I only see that accelerating, right? And then the back end technology using Gen AI to create some of those things, continue to create those things even faster. I think it's definitely something that's going to happen. But I think in the grand world, in the grand scheme of creativity, you're still going to need the human touch. I don't think it'll ever be replaced. We've seen examples of when we've tried to replace editorial, with AI. Mistakenly.
Yeah, it didn't work out so good for folks at
Yeah,
ESPN and Sports Illustrated, did it?
yeah, it's a and I think the other thing that brands will continue to ensure, because I think especially the younger generations will require, is authenticity. So no matter what technology, no matter what platforms, like we're learning, well, you're not going to replace authentic messaging. You're not going to replace, authentic connections. And so no matter what the technology or the innovation is, that authenticity still remains true, and the brands still have to speak, be true to the core values of their brand and speak authentically to their audiences. I don't think that ever goes away.
Never.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, with creativity, I think there's like that imagination aspect of it. And I don't think that AI will take over creativity this year, but maybe I can't, tell you what it would look like in like the next decade. But I do think that there is a lot of imagination and just like also the process of creativity and idea, like the ideation process. I think it comes through, it doesn't happen in a second. So I think it's, in a way, I do commend AI, but I do think that it takes away some of that process. And I think also being creative with how you use this new process, because at the end of the day, AI is just a kind of like a means to an end. It's a tool. And I think like people who are afraid of it are people probably who are afraid of the drill. They're like, use your screwdriver. It's like, why would I use my screwdriver when I could just use my drill? It's something that will save time. And I also can't promise that, it won't take away people's jobs, because I do think there's like, if you think about like editing or, finding the perfect stock photo in whatever ad you're working on, I think that was someone's job to do, and it could potentially take it. But I also do think that's why like creatives and people coming into the like industry also have to be very, on their toes and like tinkering with all of these materials, because there is like, I think it's the youngest generation who like adapts the quickest with this AI tools. And I think that like I like the one thing that I would tell people is just play with it, to like find as many AI tools, because there's ChatGPT, which is just the like the biggest.
Yeah, well, I think here's what I think is interesting, right? When we talk about AI and we look at, so when I started out in the industry, when I started out, AR was becoming the thing. VR was like the thing everybody was talking about. So we were looking at Oculus headsets and they were making everyone seasick. And people were like, it's making me sick. It's too expensive. I don't know how to use it. The utility wasn't there. You see a little bit more utility as we move into augmented reality. As you know, Pokemon Go was a big thing. Shout out to the good folks over at Snapchat and all of the great things that they're doing with their filters and being able to integrate a lot of their AR experiences into experiential work with Disney and Coca-Cola, etc. The name of the game, I think, when we talk about our industry and how emerging technologies can actually take off and not have this downslope, is utility and efficiency. And so, yes, I think there are tons of conversations that are happening right now about, will the robots take our jobs? Honestly, I've seen sci-fi, and in about 15, 20 years, they might. However, until we get there, I think this predictive learning is actually taking away those barriers that we were talking about, Enas, when those barriers that kind of keep people out of the industry. You know, sometimes brain fog is a big deal, and we're coming, like we said, we're coming out of a really draining time after COVID, where getting inspiration is a lot harder, and so it makes copywriting harder. And so having ChatGPT be the thing that's actually helping to, you know, be your creative partner and generating ideas so you can flesh it out becomes helpful. Having, you know, if you're working at a mid-sized agency or a smaller indie agency and you don't have the luxury of having 35 creatives on board all of the time, there is this aspect of AI generative content that it's like, it does kind of cut the process in half, which allows there to be bigger margins when we're talking about revenue. And so I see a lot of utility there. I see a lot of creativity, not just in how design and aesthetic looks, but how building teams and operationally how you function as a business works. And so I'm excited to see how that actually evolves in 2024, because people are becoming a lot more nimble in how they approach looking for work in this industry, and are able to sell in. You know, you don't necessarily have to be a top five firm to bring in business. You could be an independent consultant and still be able to turn around creative, programmatic, et cetera, in a way, and compete with the larger agencies. So I actually see AI as a good thing short term. When we see it looking like a Will Smith movie in about 15, 20 years, I'm sure I'll change my thought process.
I mean, but I think that's where it's going to, because in a way, what it's aiding and abetting right now is personalization, right? So for consumers, I feel like it's building trust with them when they're buying products. So you can try on the makeup before you actually buy, which is probably motivating you more to buy it because you can see it on yourself. And then also it can anticipate what you need before you even need it. So if you bought makeup 3 months ago and it's like, all right, you've had this makeup for 3 months, they now know that you need to buy another one. So I think there's going to be a lot of utility that is given to the consumer. I know that everyone's focused right now on how it's going to affect employment, but I think that's going to be one of the things that's motivating brands to invest in a way that makes sense, instead of just, you know, the flashy, trendy stuff. Because I think even when you were talking about the Pokemon Go, when that came out, it was trendy, and every brand, or a lot of brands, are trying to jump on it. I think once the trend dies down, that's when they start looking for how they can actually have some utility and add to the bottom line.
For sure. So I know we're coming up on time in a little bit, but we've got two more aspects to cover. We can't have a conversation about inclusion, or sorry, we can't have a conversation about, look at this Freudian slip. And I didn't even mean for it to come out like that, but we can't have a conversation about advertising without talking about inclusion, even though oftentimes people feel like they are separate conversations. And I feel like we're in the right company of folks, the good folks at the Ad Club, Rick, yourself, Enas, yourself. Let's talk about it. What do we think is on the horizon for the conversation of inclusion in advertising for 2024? Rick, I'll toss it to you because that is on your resume. What's it looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're making gradual improvements, right? I think in general, you're seeing more representation, and it's been a gradual process. depending on which ethnicity we're talking about. But I think it's been a slow process, and I think increasingly becoming a more inclusive environment. And when you hear Mark Pritchard talking about, well, there is no general market in multicultural. Everything's multicultural, right? So you're not looking at the biggest global CPG advertiser in the world. And another brand innovators plug. He was on stage with us in Cannes with Byron Allen, and Byron Allen, basically asked Mark Pritchard to come with him, right? Because he wanted to say, like, this is somebody who's making a change, who has authority, who's taking, who's taking a claim and saying multicultural is actually not a specialized advertising. Everything is multicultural. So is that the entire industry? No. Do we still have gaps and ceilings? And yes, for sure. But and I think as a longtime board member of the Ad Club and the previous chair and on the executive committee, it's great to see that we continue to see our marketers at the brand innovators side too, on the brand innovators side too, continually invest more in messaging around inclusivity and diversity, because that it's not. I think we've known this, but increasingly it's and Pritchard says the same thing. It's business sense, right? It's not a extracurricular activity in corporate America. It's not something you're doing that it's a nice to have. It's also a business imperative, right? The world is becoming more of the global stage is becoming more diverse, right? And so if you want to make sure you're doing great business with all these diverse groups, you have to have inclusive messaging. So that's I'd say it's improving. And I think we're in recent years, even, I think one of the most promising aspects, if there is a promising aspect coming out of the really tough times of the pandemic and the surge in hate crimes and anti-Semitic crimes, et cetera, is the activism and allyship that has arisen, right? And more people working together to say, okay, we have an issue to solve. Unfortunately, there's still a portion of the population that's stuck on the other side, but I feel like the activism and allyship that came out of recent years is helping propel taking action. And then whether it's companies focusing on Black-owned businesses, or stop AAPI hate, and making real investments to make those cultural changes and impacts to the culture. I think it can't logically dictate it's going to have an impact on inclusivity and messaging. We're starting to see that, so I'm optimistic. I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I'm optimistic that it'll continue to improve.
Yeah,
Enas, you.
Yeah, so I think this is like a make or break year where, it's like, I think with AI and everything, all the new technologies, I think all the challenges the industry had is magnified because we have this new tool. And what does that mean? I think, people of color and people of, underrepresented groups are usually in the bottom portion, or like the portion of the group where it might be more vulnerable to being laid off. Like my peers are still being laid off since like the past, year-ish. And I think that people are either, like the industry has to actively choose, are we going to invest? Because I think also like the one cool thing, like in the fellowship program that you have, we like to call the messy middle, where if people in leadership, because I think at the end of the day, AI needs to be managed, and who is managing that? Like if you think of it, AI as an intern, basically, I think that's how I like to think about it. Who's going to manage the intern? And it's like, if you are the intern, we don't need you anymore because we already have this really super smart that has everything on the, like all the knowledge of the world intern, or simple junior level creatives. Why do we need like a photographer? But anyway, I can chat about this, but I think that we have to actively choose how we're going to elevate people who are most vulnerable, and also value them and their perspectives. for the
Yeah.
yeah.
For
Because
sure.
I think that it could either go really well where everyone, the progress we've been making in diversity, equity, inclusion is advanced, or it can regress because everyone's economic fears just like
Yeah.
goes in a tizzy. Yeah.
So I love the fact that you both are here, and thank God for you. I think I might be a little less optimistic, and largely not just because of Samir, you're laughing, but this is why this is Mixed Company Podcast. So I am a little less optimistic. I 100% see a shift. I see a shift in how conversations are happening. I think, Rick, you are right. I am seeing the conversation going from, let's say, the inclusion officer and actually moving more into the business conversation. And so we are seeing, I've been accused of being having a crush on Byron Allen. But that's a whole other story. I think the fact that he's bringing these conversations to the forefront, bringing them to C-suite conversations and debates, and even at the legal level is important. Mark Pritchard continuously has this as a part of his conversations in the media and how he approaches the work. And I think that that is great. And I think that that is where I'm seeing the progress. Where my lack of optimism comes in is the fact that it is, no one has called it a recession, but budgets are shrinking, they're being pulled back. Agencies, Enas, you've mentioned, over the last year and a half, they've consistently been making cuts, whether these are public cuts or cuts that they're making at a more secretive level. It's constantly happening. And the people that we're seeing on the internal side that are being impacted tend to be people who are marginalized or underrepresented. And that goes from anywhere from folks who identify with disabilities, physical and unseen, and seen and unseen disabilities, people who identify as Black, Latino, Asian, mixed race, Native, etc. We're also seeing that there are less opportunities for full-time senior roles for people to move up within those underrepresented areas. I'm also kind of a little bit concerned about how messaging will start to change once we get into the thick of election season. And so it is an election year. It is also a leap year, so that means it's an extra day for us to figure out what happens at the polls. But
Yeah.
as we've seen since 2012, the election and this battle, this ferocious battle between the two different ideals of whether we are, quote unquote, whether we are more conservative or we are more liberal, actually starts to impact whether or not we value diversity, equity, and inclusion as a lifestyle, a way of thinking, a business approach. And so I think, Enas, you're right. It could go either way. This could be potentially a year where folks are like, enough is enough. We need to just stay 10 toes down and keep our eyes on the prize. However, we've seen quite a few agencies are doing away with their DE&I departments. They are shrinking, largely because budgets are shrinking, and we do have to make, as a business, you do have to make your choices. And so those choices, even though in some areas they may seem like small pocketed choices that won't impact the greater thing, in fact, they will impact the industry in the long run, because people start to see and hear, what do you value as a company? And if DEI isn't it, folks will not focus on it. And so by the time we get to November, I am going to be spent. Okay. I am just tired.
Yeah, I mean, when you said make or break, I took it a different way, because I was thinking about it through the lens of the consumer work. DEI is already under attack. We saw what happened last year, and because it's an election year, the discourse around diversity and inclusion is going to get louder. So those brands have started to dip their toe into increasing representation in their marketing 2 years ago. We've already started to see them regress. So I think a lot of them are going to continue to regress this year in order to not anger their consumers. And so I think when that happens, the brands that are who have doubled down on diversity over the last couple of years, they're going to continue to do what they've been doing. And those other brands are going to try to mimic it, because this is an industry of trends. This is why we're talking. And when they mimic it, they're going to end up with their foot in their mouth. I think toward the end of the year, we're going to see a lot more discourse with the marketing that's coming out with brands that are trying to input or have an input in the social landscape that's happening. And so I think there's going to be brands that are going to win, and it's going to be very few brands, and we're going to see more brands getting their asses handed to them through social media as they mess up.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely agree, Simeon, in terms of the immediacy of the response, right? We didn't really talk about the impact of social, but it's an influencer marketing, which now I think we kind of mentioned it earlier. Influencer marketing is no longer this like nice to have specialized thing on the side. It's a core, it's a core tool, like it's a core medium. And part of that is because the immediacy and real time, impact and ability to read consumers' responses so quickly. In terms of, let me walk back my comments earlier, Kai. So you don't think I think the industry's solved for diversity and inclusivity, because it has not. I think my comments are really more around evolution, right? That there have been
evolved,
steps
yeah.
that have been taken. Have we taken steps backwards? Most definitely, plenty. We can probably rattle off a bunch of examples that happened just last year alone. And I also would say, conversely, it's not going to be 1 year make or break, right? It's going to be another year of baby steps, and hopefully, my back to my glass half full persona. I hope it's going to be big steps, but I don't think it's going to be like boom. We went back 40 years now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Politically, I'm very scared by how things are trending in general, but it's a whole other podcast. But
Doesn't
if you
have to
think
be,
about
Rick, not on this one. Just kidding.
oh man, but I'm just worried. Am I moving to Canada or what's happening? But it's like when I think about the younger generations who are more informed, right, and they want more authenticity. They want more purpose-driven messaging from their brands, right? This has a halo effect on the impact of our culture, right? Because their expectations are more authenticity, more purpose-driven messaging, more CSR support, more support of diversity and inclusive messaging. So my hope is that cycle, right, with the younger generations, as some of us, and I guess I'm one of the older ones now, but cycles the older generations out, like that will also impact the affect the tone and impact the acceleration of how diversity and inclusivity, how D&I, the equity piece, of course, evolves within our culture. Because I'm just speaking optimistically, because having grew up in an environment that was horrific, and there was representation, quite, and my quick anecdote, I'll say. As an Asian American growing up in this country, I hadn't felt represented in media and advertising until like the last few years, right? And quite frankly, I admired, the entertainers and athletes were all black that I admired, because I saw a person of color and I said, that's America. Like look at how these people can be so prominent, right? They can become president, like in being heard and seen as an East Asian American. It's only been the last few years. So don't take my
No,
comments
because
as
I think
overstating.
what you
Yeah,
said
no,
is
sure.
actually really important, because you touched on you touched on activism, and I think that activism is actually going to really be triggered this year because of everything that's going on. We're seeing conflicts between countries, very powerful countries.
Yeah.
We're seeing dynamics between socioeconomic dynamic shifts. We're seeing a lot more. And as we were talking about access to tools like AI, as we were talking about access to creativity in new ways because barriers are being removed, I think activism is going to play a major role in 2024 when it comes to the conversation of inclusion. And I think you are 100% spot on for that, Rick. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, can I just add like really quickly when it comes to I think also a big conversation in inclusion will be like AI generated inclusion, where it's like people in like their workaround for including people is having AI generate a disabled woman of color, like what I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. And I think that that also adds to the make or break. Like, are we actually going to be doing inclusion, especially like representation in ads, or are we going to pretend and have AI do it? That's just my 2 cents.
Well, we have a whole year to find out. It is, you know, this year, every year tends to show us a whole bunch of new stuff that we could never predict. But I think we've gotten a good start in our conversation. And so we're going to close out this episode, our first inaugural episode for the Advertising Club of New York presents Mixed Company Podcast. Rick, Enas, thank you so much. Ad Club team, thank you so much. We'll be back with more episodes this year. You stay tuned. Have a good one.
Talk soon, y'all.